So when it comes to chocolate chip cookies, I have little, if any, self-control. My blood type is B, which is short for Betty Crocker. And man, when somebody puts a warm chocolate chip cookie in front of me, it is about impossible for me to say no to it. Now, I don't know what your cookie is, but I know that you have one. We all have one. And whatever it is, there is something that when it's offered to you, more often than not, you're gonna say yes to it. We all have that thing in our life, right? And so what I want you to do this morning, I need a little crowd participation. I need a little help this morning. I'm not giving out cookies, so don't raise your hand if you think that's what we're doing, sorry. But what I need you to do real quick is just take a second and share with somebody sitting nearby what's that thing for you that you have a hard time saying no to. Take a minute and do that right now. So I asked a few people this week, I put something on Facebook that a whole bunch of you replied to, and I asked some other people this week, hey, what's that thing for you? And I got a whole bunch of interesting responses. About 90% of them were some kind of food. So I don't know what that says about us as a church, but apparently that's our thing. We just like to eat, right? But I got some really interesting ones. A couple people said pumpkin spice latte, I guess because it's fall. You just can't say no to the PSL, you know? That's your thing. Somebody kind of ashamedly said Taco Bell, and I said, don't be ashamed of that. Taco Bell is a great American institution, and you should be proud to go there. That's a good thing. One of the best responses I ever heard to this question was somebody who said, British guys with British accents. I guess they just sound smarter or something. But listen, ladies, I don't know if you know this, but we won the war. We won the Revolutionary War. So American guys, that's where it's at, ladies, okay? Come on. So listen, I don't know what it is for you, but again, we've all got that thing. So in the 1960s, there was a professor from Stanford by the name of Walter Mischel who conducted an experiment that's come to be known as the Marshmallow Test. What he did was he gathered up some elementary age kids and he put them in a room and he said, I'm gonna leave you in here for 15 minutes, and in front of them he put a plate with a single marshmallow on it. And he told them, when I come back in 15 minutes, if that marshmallow is still there, I'll give you a second marshmallow. And I wanna walk you through some of the results because they're fascinating and they reveal a lot. 2/3 of the kids just ate the marshmallow right away. They couldn't wait. And so they earned themselves the moniker instant gratifiers. The other third of the kids were able to exercise some self-control, and they left the marshmallow there, and when he came back, it's still there, so they got the second marshmallow, and they earned themselves the moniker high delayers. What's even more interesting was this. 20 years after the initial experiment was conducted, he went back and he interviewed those children as adults. And what he found out was staggering. Of that third of the kids who were able to delay gratification, those high delayers, those third of the kids who were able to not eat the marshmallow, 100% of them had successful careers, graduated college, and stayed married for life. Not 50%, not 60%, 100% of them, 100% of them. And what's even more interesting was this. There was a side issue that they came across, and I want to read you a quote. He said, I researched trust in decision-making. I researched trust for adults and children. He said, trust is a tremendous issue. Therefore, in the Marshmallow Test, the first thing we do is make sure the researcher is someone who's extremely familiar to the child. In other words, if the child doesn't trust the person that's making the promise to them, then they're not gonna expect that they're gonna deliver, and they're just gonna eat the marshmallow right away and not even expect that there would be a second marshmallow. Here's what we learned from this test, though. We learned that there's a direct correlation between delaying gratification and experiencing success in your personal life. Those things are very closely related, and trust is a huge issue in whether or not you choose to do that or not. So hold on to that thought, okay? Today we're gonna be in Matthew chapter 4. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open up there. We're wrapping up our series that we've been in for a few weeks out of the book of Proverbs. We're gonna start in Matthew today. Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 1. If you're ready with that, we'll put it on the screen for you too. Let's dive in. Here we go. It says, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. So that's the whole purpose for him going into the wilderness. He went there to be tempted. After fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. Obviously, you don't eat for weeks. You're gonna be hungry. And so the tempter came to him and he said, hey, if you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. And Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." And then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you're the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." And Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Well, again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and all of their splendor. "All this I'll give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." And then the devil left him and angels came and attended him. So a little context here. This happens right on the heels of Jesus' baptism in the Jordan River. He heads out into the Judean wilderness, and for the next several weeks, he's gonna fast and he's gonna pray and he's gonna prepare himself for what's about to be a 3-year ministry and a 3-year march toward the cross. And on the heels of that fast, that time in the wilderness alone, Satan shows up and he begins to offer Jesus food and wealth and power. And in the midst of all this, Jesus somehow resists. He's able to restrain himself. He says no to these temptations. And you know what's really interesting that didn't strike me until recently was this happens at the end of Jesus' fast. It's already over. So he could have had something to eat and it would have been fine. There's no reason he couldn't have. But still, even despite that, he's able to resist. And so my question when I read that story is, how'd he do it? How was he able to resist that kind of temptation in that kind of moment, to show such resolve? And I can answer that question. I'll say it this way. He was able to resist because he was full of the Father's love. He had all he needed and all he wanted in life, and it was found in that. And I would say it was found in 2 words. Jesus was rich in acceptance and in significance. He was rich in acceptance and significance. Now, most people who break down Matthew chapter 4 in sermons or in writing, they'll tell you that the weapon that Jesus chose to battle temptation in that moment was crucial, and I agree, because every time Satan tempted Jesus, how did Jesus respond? He responded with Scripture, right? He responded with truth. He responded with the words of God, and I think that's critical. However, maybe you've done that. I've done that at times in my life when I've been presented with temptation. I've confronted those things with the truth, and yet time and time again, no matter what I do, I find myself falling into these destructive patterns, pride or greed or lust or whatever other destructive behavior it is, and I've experienced that it doesn't always work. And so please hear this. When Jesus was full of temptation, what he was full of is often what I'm empty of in those moments. And maybe you felt that too, and that is this. He believed that he was genuinely accepted by the Father, and he believed that his significance was wrapped up in who God said he was, So imagine this. What would it look like to go into battle with temptation, knowing that you're completely accepted and that your significance is rooted in who God says you are? I want to give you a visual for this. I came across this video recently. These 2 girls jousting at one of these bounce houses, and after the girl on the left makes quick work out of her sister, she sets her sights on her little brother. Boom! Just a little guy. Poor guy can't even walk. He never saw it coming, right? Now we assess that and we think, that girl's gonna be one of 2 things. She's either gonna be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or a serial killer. There's no in between, right? Well, I show you that video to ask you this question. How great would it be if we could take some of our bad habits, if we could take some of those temptations, those vices, or those guilty pleasures, and we could do that to them? We could just make them disappear with one swoop of our hand, the cussing habit, or the overspending habit, or the overeating habit, or the gossip habit, the smoking, whatever it is you want to kick. If you could just take that thing and with one swoop of your hands, you could just, boom, just knock it out. Wouldn't that be great? But we know it doesn't work that way, right? We know that it's not always that easy. I don't know about you, but I know this is true in my life, that even if I have a victory over temptation, even if I'm able to resist something in one moment, I've got such a history of falling to temptation. I've got such a history of giving in that Satan loves to bring up. He loves to bring to the forefront of my mind that even if I experience a victory before the day's over, I'm feeling defeated all over again. You ever felt that way? You ever experienced that? Well, if you have, I want you to know that you're in good company, because I've been there and you're in a room full of people who've been there too. We've been there right where you are, if that's how you're feeling today. And what I want you to know this morning, if you take one thing out of this, if you walk away today with one thing and your strategy to help you reshape how you're gonna fight against temptation, this is what I want you to understand about self-control. Are you ready? The key to self-control is not to stop doing the wrong things. It's to start believing the right things. We say that again. The key to temptation is not to stop doing the wrong things. It's to start believing the right things. Believing the right things will help us to begin to behave in the right way. That's the beginning, and Jesus modeled this for us. Please don't miss this. Before he goes into the desert for 40 days, right, to fast and to pray, he's baptized. And at his baptism in the Jordan River, God says this. He says, "This is my dearly loved son who brings me great joy." Those are the words that Jesus heard his Father say about him. Friends, those are incredible words of acceptance and significance. Jesus believed that his Father loved him like that, and because of that, it allowed Jesus to identify himself and to introduce himself to the world in a very unique and profound way. And it allowed him to have the strength to resist that temptation that came his way. Now, we call these things the I am statements of Jesus. The way he introduced himself to us, these are the I am statements. And he said things like this. He said, "I am the resurrection and the life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the gate." Right? These are very profound statements, but one of the things I love about Jesus is this. Anytime he received love from the Father, he didn't hoard it. He didn't stockpile it. He didn't keep it, but he immediately and freely gave it away. He turned around and he handed it right back out to other people, and that's how the I am statements of Jesus turned into the you are statements of Jesus. So here's what Jesus says about you. He says, "You are a city on a hill. You are a royal priesthood." And this is my favorite. He says, "You are a chosen and cherished son or daughter of the King." And if we can begin to believe that, if we can begin to believe those things about the Father, that he loves us in the same way that he loves Jesus, I think we'll begin to behave in the same way that Jesus behaved, because he wasn't an instant gratifier. He was a high delayer. He was a high delayer. He understood what the Father had promised, and he trusted the Father to deliver. That's why Jesus said to us, "I've come that you could have life and have it to the full." And I want you to know that the only reason that you don't experience life to the full is because sin empties you of that life. It robs you of that life. It strips it away. And when we give in to temptation, that's what we're doing, is we're emptying ourselves of that life. And instead, we go looking for something else to fill this void that's left in our life because we gave in. And you've experienced this. Everything Satan offers seems so appealing. It seems so good in the moment. It seems so right. It seems like the thing that we want or the thing that we need has finally come along. But the only problem is, all that giving into temptation does is feed the sin appetite in our lives, and it doesn't truly feed our souls. And we're left feeling empty. We're tempted by different things, but every one of us battles that on a daily basis. So let me give you some weapons, some tools to use in this battle with temptation. I love what Alcoholics Anonymous teaches people as they go through the program. They use this acronym that they call HALT. Maybe you've heard this before, but HALT. If you talk to an alcoholic who's caught in the throes of addiction or one who's in recovery, they will tell you that what they learn is if you rush into decision making, you are gonna make a bad decision. If you don't take your time, if you rush in, whether it's a big decision or a small decision, doesn't really matter. If you rush into it, you're gonna make a poor choice. And so they use this acronym to help them make wise choices. HALT stands for this: hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. And the idea is, if you make decisions when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, you are much more likely to make an unwise choice. And so they say instead, halt, hold up, take your time, right? And I found that to be true in my life. When I'm hungry, I'm grouchy. Man, I can be a bear. My wife will tell you that. When I'm hungry, I can be a pain to be around, right? And it makes me angry sometimes if I get too hungry. Anybody else like that? Maybe some of you, I see some hands around the room. Probably more wives are elbowing you guys to raise your hand, right? Jesus has been alone in the desert for 40 days. He's lonely, and he's tired, and he's hungry, and Satan picks that moment to attack. And we need to know that that's what he's gonna do in our lives too. And so when you find yourself in a moment where you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, don't rush into decision making. Take a moment, stop, slow down. Ryan shared this a couple weeks ago, but another acronym that we use all the time in our lives, ASAP, usually stands for what? As soon as possible. But if you were here a couple weeks ago, he told us what we need to do is we need to change that, and instead it needs to mean as slow as possible, as slow as possible. So here's what that means. Before you walk into a dating relationship, slow down and ask yourself, is this a person I want to be in a relationship with? Or before you walk into marriage, slow down, take some time and really evaluate, is this a person I want to make this lifelong commitment to? Before you step into a career path, slow down. hit the pause, hit the brakes a little bit and ask yourself, is this a path I want to start down? Is this something I want to start into, right? Before you get into your college education, any of those kind of things. How about this one? Before you go to the grocery store, slow down. Make a list. Don't go when you're hungry. That's the worst thing you can do, right? Especially if, I'm serious, especially if one of your things is you overeat or you eat unhealthy food. Then slow down before you go to the grocery store. Go in with a plan. Take time, be wise. Before you spend money, sleep on it, all those kind of things. Let me tell you why this is important. It's important because, at least I found this to be true in my life. When I find myself struggling with a lack of self-control, it's almost always tied to one of a small handful of other things, okay? And I'll give you 4. Sometimes it's tied to fear. When you find yourself wrestling with a lack of self-control, sometimes it's tied to fear. You find yourself in a situation where you're put back on your heels, you're afraid of something, and so instead of taking time to stop and pray and surrender that fear to God, you respond out of it, and it's fight or flight, right? And you wind up making an unwise choice. So we need to slow down. We need to slow down. We need to ask, is fear behind this? What about this one? How about anger? Somebody says something or does something, it's just the last straw, right? It just pushes you over the edge. It may not even be that big a thing, but it's just the last in a long line of little things that somebody says or does to you, and it just pushes you over the edge, and so you respond out of that anger. And when you do that, I don't know if you found this to be true, but I have, it almost always leaves you feeling regretful. Almost always leaves you with a feeling of remorse, like, I wish I could go back and take those words back, but you can't, okay? Somebody I heard say this years ago, words are like toothpaste. Once they're out there, you can't put them back in the tube, and that's how it works. So when you respond out of anger, you say things you regret, so you need to slow down. You need to pump the brakes. You need to take time to de-escalate, right? Or how about this one? How about guilt? You've already failed so many times, and so you think, man, what's the point of even trying? I might as well just so you throw your hands up, and you continue down this road of destructive behavior and patterns in your life. Or how about envy? Maybe you spend so much time, so much energy, so many of your resources just trying to keep up with the Joneses. You look around and you see things other people have, and you want that, so that's what you're after, and envy just fuels you. It just fuels you. It fuels the decisions that you make. And so instead, what you need to do is you need to recognize that that's going to land you in a place where your relationships with other people and your relationship with God become unhealthy because you're just constantly consumed in your envy of others. And you know what? Every one of those things, whether it's guilt or anger or fear or envy, whatever it is, those are all like fruit that grow from the same tree. And that tree is discontentment. There's something in your life that you're discontent with. There's something in your life that you're just not happy with. You're dissatisfied. And maybe what began as a small thing has just grown into a bigger and bigger thing, right? And it's led you down this path of poor choices and bad decisions and unhealthy actions. And now you just have this overwhelming sense of defeat, and you don't know how to get rid of it. It's like a sickness that you don't know how to treat. Proverbs 25:28 says it this way. It says, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. Like a city whose walls are broken, like a defenseless city, like a city that has no way to guard itself against the enemy. That is like a person who lacks self-control. And some of you can relate to that because that's how you feel when we talk about this subject. You feel broken down, you feel defeated, you're feeling defenseless. But let me give you some good news this morning. I've said this before, I'm gonna say it again. The good news is you are not the only one. You are not alone in this, right? Every one of us at one time or another have been in that place, and many of us in the room today, we're in that place right now. And Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, had some encouraging words to offer you on this subject because he had been there too. See, before Paul became a Christian, he was a leader in his community. He had a lot of power. He had a lot of authority and a lot of influence. He was a very wealthy individual. And when he experienced the call of God in his life, he gave all that up. He walked away from it. And so Paul now is somebody who can look back on all the things he had. He lived a wealthy lifestyle. He had everything he could ever want in the world's eyes, right? And he gave it all up. And so I'm sure he got the question all the time, Paul, how are you able to be so content? Looking back and seeing what you had, knowing you don't have it anymore. And here's the advice that he gives us in Philippians chapter 4. He said, I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. He said, this is what it comes down to. He said, I can do all this, not from my own strength, not from my own resources, not from my own attitude, not from my own actions. He said, I can do all this through what? Through him who gives me strength. The strength to be content, it doesn't come from me. It comes from the Father. The strength to be happy, to find joy in this life, it doesn't come from me. It doesn't come from within me. It comes from the Father. That's what Paul says. And you got to know that as followers of Jesus, we are rich in the Father's love. Right now, today, we have all that we need. You have all you could ever want. All the strength that you need to battle temptation comes from knowing that. And when it comes to making decisions, what that means is don't feel pressure, because the Father is not pressuring you. Instead, you need to know that he wants to give you the strength you need to make wise choices, and he is in your corner cheering you on. He is cheering for you. So what I want to do in just a few short minutes is I want to give you a strategy for how to fight against temptation. I want you to walk out of here today with some action steps. So I'm going to really quickly give you 7 ways to grow and develop in self-control. Here's 7 things you can put to use in your life. You can put these into practice today, okay? And we'll do this quickly. Number 1, know your weaknesses. Know your weaknesses. Do you know where you're vulnerable? Because Satan does. And that's where his point of attack begins, right? Whatever that thing is for you, even if it's a little thing, even if it's something you laugh about, Satan knows what it is for you. And that's where he's gonna strip your feeling of control in your life. And he's gonna take that from you and he's gonna own it, right? His point of attack will begin there. Remember the verse in Proverbs? Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. Satan knows where your walls are weak. He knows where you're vulnerable. So you've got to be self-aware and you've got to know your weaknesses. And then when you do, number 2, you've got to remove temptations. You've got to remove those. If you know you're vulnerable in some area of your life, don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be easily tempted. If you struggle with drinking, don't go to a bar. If you struggle with eating food that's not healthy for you, then don't go to McDonald's. You're not going to get a salad. When you go to the grocery store, take a list. If you struggle with spending, get on a budget and stick to it, right? You got to remove temptations from your life, because when you put yourself in places to be easily tempted, you're setting yourself up to fail every single time. Here's the beautiful thing. If you will do this, if you'll work to remove temptations from your life, God will honor that effort. In 1 Corinthians 10, we read these words. Paul writes, "No temptation has seized you except what is common to man." In other words, you will never experience a temptation that plenty of other people haven't experienced. And in the moment, it may feel like you're the only one, but listen to me, plenty of other people have felt what you feel in that moment of temptation. But he goes on and he says, God is faithful and he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out of it so that you can endure it. So remove temptations from your life and God will honor that. Number 3, you've got to set clear goals and you've got to have a plan. It's not enough to say that you want to avoid temptation or you want to grow in self-control in some area of your life. You've got to have a plan in place to do it. If you overspend, again, set a budget. If you overeat, you need to go to the grocery store with the list. If you struggle with lust, you need to put a filter on your internet or unplug your computer, shut off your phone. If you wrestle with anger, you need to have steps in place to de-escalate before you respond out of anger. Whatever your struggle is, you've got to set goals and you've got to have action steps in place to help you avoid temptation in the moment. You've got to have those guardrails, those safety things in place. But here's the catch. Unless you're either ridiculously disciplined or insanely strong, you will not be able to do that without this 4th thing, and that is that you've got to build some accountability into your life. You've got to build accountability into your life. You've got to confide in someone who loves you. You've got to confide in someone who loves Jesus. You've got to confide in someone who you can trust, and they've got to be somebody who wants the best for you, okay? Find that person and confide in them and give them permission to ask you questions that are difficult, maybe questions that are even uncomfortable, and then you've got to commit to answer honestly. You've got to commit to respond honestly to those people. Something powerful happens when we welcome accountability in our lives. James chapter 5 says it this way. Confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. There's something powerful that happens when we're honest with each other and when we allow each other to support us. And so you need someone to walk with you and help you steer clear of temptation. Number 5, you've got to create some new habits. Remember that the key to self-control isn't to stop doing the wrong things, it's to start believing the right things. And if you're gonna start to do differently, you have to first start to think differently. That's how it works. Romans chapter 12. It says, don't conform to the pattern of this world. Don't do everything that everybody else does, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's where we have to start. And changing your way of thinking is directly related to changing your way of doing. So you have to reprogram those thought processes to avoid temptations. And as you do, number 6, you've got to celebrate victories, even small ones, because here's the deal. Satan is gonna beat you up over every little failure. He is gonna beat you up over every little defeat. And the best way to combat that is to give yourself permission to celebrate those victories. Take time every day to celebrate the temptations that you avoided. Take time every day to celebrate those moments when you said no, when you would have said yes before, or when it would have been easy to say yes, or when it would have made you maybe happier in the moment to say yes, but you knew it wasn't wise, you knew it wasn't right, you knew it was sinful, and so you said no. Celebrate those things and thank God for the strength that he gave you, Philippians chapter 4, right? Thank God for the strength that he gave you to resist those temptations and celebrate those things. But then here's the last thing, number 7. You also have to be able to do this. You have to be able to forgive yourself and move forward. Because not every moment of every day is gonna be a victory. You're still gonna have moments where you struggle. You're still gonna have moments where it's hard. And in those moments, you already know Satan's gonna pile on and you can't do it too. I found this to be true in my life. Maybe you have, that I hold my sin against me long after God's already forgiven me for it. Anybody else feel that? And so we have to give ourselves permission to move forward. We have to forgive ourselves and trust that God's forgiveness is true. That's a promise he'll deliver on. So there you go, 7 things. Here's why this is so important. It's important because, yes, it's true that there's a voice of God, just like Jesus heard at his baptism when he said, "This is my son who gives me great joy." And God says that about, "This is my son, this is my daughter. They give me great joy." At the same time, there's another voice that's gonna whisper things to you like this, just like this voice is whispered in my life. Jimmy, you're not smart enough. You're not good enough. You're not talented, and you're not athletic enough. You're not handsome, whatever it is. Like, there's this voice just whispers things to us all the time, and you've heard that voice in your life just constantly trying to drag you on. It's that same voice that's told you all through your life, the thing that the world's offering you, you better say yes to it or you're gonna miss out. Because God doesn't know what he's talking about, right? He doesn't want what's best for you. That's what this voice tells us all the time. And we have to put these guardrails in our life so that when we hear that voice, we can resist it. Now, sin leads to shame. And shame is that voice that says there's no hope for you. Shame is that voice that says you've gone too far, that says you can't be loved and you won't be loved. And you've got to know that that is the opposite of the Father's voice. You have to be able to tell the difference between those. And when you begin to believe that the God of the universe doesn't love you, it is downright scary what you'll do and the things that you'll say and the lengths you'll go to fill the void of that love quotient that God has wired into you. But here's something that's true. Satan knows your name, but he calls you by your failure. But Jesus knows your failure, and he calls you by your name. He knows your sin. He knows your struggle, and he calls you by your name. I want to read you a story that illustrates that, and then we're going to be done. The story goes like this. A small house was simple but adequate. It consisted of one large room on a dusty street. Its red-tiled roof was one of many in this poor neighborhood on the outskirts of a Brazilian village. It's a small home, but a comfortable home, and Maria and her daughter Christina had done what they could to add color to the gray walls and warmth to the dirt floor. The furnishings were modest: an old calendar, a crucifix, a faded photograph, 2 basins of water, and 2 small mats to sleep on. You see, Maria's husband died when Christina was an infant. And though Maria's job as a maid afforded few luxuries, it was reliable and it did provide food for the 2 of them. Now at 15, Christina was old enough to get a job and help out. Some say she got her independent streak from her mother. She was a beautiful young woman who filled every room she entered with laughter. She had that rare magic that made every person feel like a king or queen just by being near her. Christina spoke often of going to the city. She dreamed of trading her dusty neighborhood for exciting avenues and city life. But just the thought of it horrified her mother. Maria would remind Christina, people don't know you there. Jobs are scarce there. Life is cruel there. You see, Maria knew exactly what her daughter would have to do for a living. And that's why her heart broke when she awoke one morning to find her daughter's bed empty. Maria immediately threw some clothes in a bag and gathered up all of her money and ran out of the house. And on her way to the bus stop, she stopped at a drugstore and sat in the photograph booth. She closed the curtain and spent all she could on photos of herself. With her bag full of black and white photos, Maria boarded the bus for Rio de Janeiro to search for her daughter among the 15 million residents of that big city. Now, Maria knew Christina had no way of making money, and she also knew that her daughter was too stubborn to give up. When pride meets hunger, a human will do things that were before unthinkable. So Maria searched every bar and hotel and nightclub and brothel she could find, and in each place she left her picture taped to the bathroom mirror, tacked to the bulletin board, or fastened in the corner of a photo booth. And on the back of each picture, she wrote a simple note. Now, it wasn't long before her money in the pictures ran out, and the weary mother wept as the bus began its long journey back to her small village. Well, a few years passed, and Christina descended the stairs of a hotel. Her young face had aged, her brown eyes no longer danced with youth, but spoke of pain and fear. Her laughter had been silenced, and her dream had become a nightmare. 1,000 times over, she had longed to trade these countless beds for her secure mat on the floor of her dusty home next to her mom, yet the village, in too many ways, was too far away. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, her eyes noticed a familiar face. She looked again, and there on the mirror was a small picture of her mom. Christina's eyes burned as she teared up, and her throat tightened as she walked across the room and removed the small photo from the wall. She kissed the picture, and then she turned it over, and written on the back was a simple note. Maria had written, "Honey, it doesn't matter what you've done or what you've become. Just come home." So she did. Now, friends, different temptations pull us in different directions, but the one thing they always do is they steer us away from home. They steer us away from the Father. It leads us away from the safety and security and love of our Heavenly Father who cares for us so much. Every one of us has this vulnerable area where we're weak. We know that, and we need to identify where that is, but we also need to know that God wants to help. But here's the truth. He can't do his best work in your life until you allow him to love you. So whatever you've said in your past, whatever you've done in your past, whatever it is that's led you down that road, today I want you to know you can come home. You can do that. The voice of the deceiver may be telling you you're a failure, but all the while God is over here and he's saying you're not a failure. You are not defined by your past. You are not defined by your sin. You are not defined by your failure. All those things that have drawn you, those don't define you anymore. He says, my grace defines you. My love defines you. My mercy defines you. I've redeemed you. I paid for all that stuff. It doesn't matter anymore. You're mine. Just come home. Just come home. The key to self-control isn't to stop doing the wrong things. It's to start believing the right things. And so I want you to know you're a dearly loved son. You're a dearly loved daughter. And whatever you've said or done, you bring God great joy. You can believe that. You can believe in the grace of God that says that despite all of your failure and all the temptation you've fallen to in the past, you're accepted by God and your significance is found in who he says you are. So I'm going to pray in just a second and we'll wrap up. But I just want to say this. If you're feeling something this morning and that's something you need to talk about, I'm going to hang out in front of the stage here for a few minutes after the service. And I'd love to pray with you and talk with you. And there are plenty of other people here who would love to do the same thing. And we'd love to talk to you about what it looks like to come home. So let me pray for you. God, I am so grateful that your love is beyond what I understand. Because in my human nature and in my understanding, it's pretty easy to burn bridges, but yet somehow you're able to still love us despite anything that we say or do to hurt you. Despite any temptation we fall to, your grace is greater. And so God, this morning, I'm praying for anybody in this room who just needs to feel your love today. God, we know that there's truth in there too, and we know that the truth is that you don't want us to continue to fall to temptation and just throw our hands up and say, it's okay, God still loves me. We know you want better for us because you don't want us to have that hurt in our lives. And you don't want us to experience that failure in our lives, that defeat. And so God, my prayer this morning is for wisdom. Would you give us the wisdom and the courage and the drive, the perseverance to withstand temptation, to do the wise thing when it's not easy. And God, to know and again, to remember that even in the moments where we fail, that you're cheering for us, you're in our corner, you're there to pick us up and dust us off, and you will give us the strength to push harder. God, we're so grateful for Jesus and what you did for us on the cross through him. That's the reason that we get forgiveness and grace. We're so thankful. More than anything, God, we're so thankful that we are not defined by our sin, but we're accepted. Our significance is found in who you say we are. We love you. We thank you for Jesus. We pray this in his name. Amen.